Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I'm chatting with Melissa Zehner. Melissa founded The Content Market, which provides fractional content leadership services for startups. She specializes in building, scaling, and monetizing organic content marketing programs for B2B startups, and she wholeheartedly believes in taking a no-bullshit approach to content. In this episode, we talk about bullshit in B2B content marketing. We talk about high-integrity content, what that means, artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, with some pessimistic as well as some optimistic predictions for the future, and the joys of studying philosophy. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Melissa Zehner. You gave me some good stuff on the podcast intake form too.
I was feeling spicy when we talked a couple of weeks ago. I was thinking today, I was like, what did I say?
Some days I have all the hot takes, and some days I'm like, I don't even care. I'll see stuff on LinkedIn that I'm like, I don't agree with that, but then I'm like, whatever, let them have their opinion. That's fine.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, the two spectrums that I waffle between is either very zen about it or very spicy. There's no in between. You get one or the other. Yeah. Sometimes
I feel like I work myself up into a tizzy over stuff, and I'm like, I should just focus on me. What am I doing? I got to save the content marketing industry. Well, I don't know, maybe chip away at it, but I'm not going to.
I think Jay Acunzo is saving the content marketing industry, and I'm going to leave Jay to that. It seems like a tall order. Yeah.
Hey, let's keep this in. Let's start the conversation here, because we can. Yeah. I like the shout out to Jay, and I agree. And one of the questions that I had prompted on my notes is your Twitter bio. Your Twitter bio says that you're obsessed with high integrity content, and that's something that Jay talks a lot about. I think he might not use those words, but I think that's a common echo throughout the work that he does and like the evangelizing of content and creativity. So I wanted to ask, what does high integrity content mean to you?
That's a great question. It is content that is thoughtful, accurate, well-researched, valuable more than anything, and is something that is really going to make an impact on the person that interacts with that content. And it doesn't have to be a life-changing impact. If I am Googling the answer to a question and you serve that up for me in a really straightforward, simple way, and I say, great, I've got it, then that's helped me. That's a valuable piece of content. I've had a good experience. There are way too many people out there just putting out crap and trying to pass it off as quality content because there's a big name attached to it or it's got a high word count. And it's not really anything that is creating a positive experience for someone. The reason that I went into content marketing is because I like the idea that new information and new ideas can change people's lives, right? We have more access to education and opportunity and mentorship and conversations and ideas than we ever had previously in history, thanks to the internet. And there's a way to use that for good, or there's a way to misuse that and just get clicks and revenue as quickly as you can and do it in a really sloppy way. And a lot of people are opting for the latter rather than the former.
Yeah, I always wonder why, or if that works and why it works, because for me, I feel like there's something. It's an intangible thing, isn't it? Like this, like I can read when somebody is phoning it in, is cynical, is a grifter. Like I can read like the lack of substance behind something, and I couldn't tell you how. There's just some je ne sais quoi to it. And then you can read, even if it's like a poorly written piece, you can read when somebody cares, when they're like putting their effort into it, when they're doing it for some more noble reason. And for me, when I see the former, it doesn't register in my brain as something to take seriously. But a lot of the internet seems to be filled with this type of stuff. So it must work to some audiences. I don't know.
I think it works for non-marketers because we are so adept and we know how to spot it. And to some extent, we probably all did that earlier in our careers before we knew better, right? Or you just have that lapse of judgment moment. I think the general public doesn't always spot it as easily. And there are situations where you're looking at the content someone's putting out and it's like, okay, but are you just hustling people?
Yeah. I think I've almost gotten, I haven't gone the grifter route, but I think I've gone an interesting, like I've gotten more pragmatic with my approach to content over the years. Cause I started out very purist. Like I was very much like, I was a fan of Ryan Holiday and a lot of bloggers who were very high quality and talked about their experiences and would do like tell-alls, and it was really good stuff. And joining CXL, I had the standard in my brain where everything had to be this amazing research-backed, best in the world piece of content. But what shifted for me wasn't necessarily that like, oh, I should just phone it in and like try to copy and paste and add 2 paragraphs and do skyscraper or do, AI driven content. It was that my definition of quality wasn't necessarily everybody else's definition of quality. Like I did find, and maybe this is like your point, it doesn't necessarily have to be like this crazy advanced piece of content. It's kind of like giving the reader what they want. But I realized in many cases what the reader wanted was a lot more simple and was a lot more, I don't know, prosaic than what I thought in my head. So I used to be more of a purist, and now I'm more like, all right, there's this mix. It's like you want to give a shit and you want to like add value to the audience, but it's also maybe it doesn't have to be the standards in my head.
Yeah, you overthink it. I mean, the best example of this is everyone complaining about recipe bloggers because, right? You know what I'm talking about, because back in the day, you look for a recipe, you find one, and they just say, here are the ingredients, here's the instructions, boom, we're done. Then they all discovered SEO, and now you look for a recipe, you hit a page, and the first 500 words are telling you about how it was grandma's favorite recipe, and we used to make it on the farm, and we used to pick the turnips by hand. And you're scrolling down the page just thinking, for the love of God, give me the recipe, right? So you're looking for something and they're not really serving up what you actually want to find. So is that a good experience? No, it's a great experience for Google. And that's probably why they're ranking highly, but that's why everyone complains about recipe bloggers.
This is also, by the way, which we'll talk about later, AI and all of that stuff. This is the number one use case for me of ChatGPT is just getting the recipe. If you're like, hey, I have these 10 ingredients in my refrigerator, show me 5 recipes to make, they'll just shoot it to you straight. But I actually really like that. It's like it takes all the fluff out. And maybe that's what kills Google eventually, is just give me the point. Get to the point.
Because ChatGPT doesn't have a motive.
Yeah.
It's not there to sell you, right? So it's just going to serve up what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Or hopefully serve up what you're looking for.
Maybe. So another point related to the high integrity thing was, and this was in the intake form that you sent me, as well as I think on your website. So you mentioned that you wholeheartedly believe in taking no bullshit approach to content. And then in the intake form, you mentioned eliminating the BS in B2B content. And I love that terminology. It's bold. I remember back in the day at CXL, like Pep and his Twitter bio would be like, I call your BS or something like that. So I really like that. So I wanted to talk about BS and content marketing, if you're cool with that.
Absolutely. There is a lot of BS in content marketing, which is why I touch on it a lot. A lot of people like to pretend it's not there. And if you're one of the people who is pretending it's not going on, you're probably one of the people who is serving it up on a platter daily on Twitter, right? So I just think we've reached this place before ChatGPT, we reached this place, one, of oversaturation in the industry. We spent the early years of our careers needing to convince people that they needed content. Nobody believed it. Everyone finally circled around to that idea, got on the content bandwagon, and now everyone thinks they need an abundance of content. So first of all, there's just an oversaturation out there. And anytime there's a lot of something, there's going to be a spectrum. There's going to be a lot of good, a lot of bad. Most of it's probably going to fall somewhere in the middle, right? Then you add in this other element, which I love because it's worked for me in my career, but there's a very low barrier to entry now. Again, the internet. Anyone can start a podcast. Anyone can start a blog. Anyone can put something on social media. So it's not, Jay Acunzo talks about this a lot too. I keep shouting out Jay, but he's great. But he talks a lot about how we should be focusing on resonance versus reach. A lot of crap gets reach. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people start tailoring their content strategy or the conversations that they're having online to just maximize the amount of eyes, maximize the amount of clicks or likes that they're getting without really paying any attention to the message that's tied to it or the value that it's bringing, right? And so you combine those two things and what do you get? You get a whole lot of crap.
I wonder if it's a metrics and incentives problem too. because the things that are easy to track are things like the awareness and the impressions, especially on social, where the barrier to entry is basically zero. Before you had to kind of know how to set up a WordPress blog and how to do some technical things and how to write a long form piece, which was difficult to do. Now you just post and ghost and just, it's like you can say whatever you want and it's very simple to do so. But like the metrics they give you are not necessarily like who is responding to this content. It's not like this is VPs of marketing. It's just a generic number of 100,000 people. And it's hard to track down to like, did this generate leads or something that's actually meaningful from a business perspective? And I feel like when you have incentives, the behavior follows the incentives. I don't know.
I would agree with you there. I think that is something that becomes more challenging as we get farther in our careers. I started writing because I had always enjoyed writing and discovered through the process of writing, I really got to know myself better. I started a blog for me a very long time before I was finding a way to monetize it, right? And then that's always the next step. How do I monetize it? How do I get readers on it? What do people want to read? And then you start writing for the results rather than writing for whatever the mission or vision is, right? There's that shift in focus. And I think it gets more difficult the longer we spend in our careers, because then you move into a management role, a director role, a VP role, and you really do have to quantify that ROI and sit in meetings with a finance guy who doesn't understand the first thing about marketing or content or creativity and justify why you need budget or why you need a new hire, right? And so you start speaking their language too. And I think we make concessions over time. And there does need to be a balance, right? Ultimately, unless you're putting out content just because you love it, which I hope a lot of people keep doing that. I love creators and I love anyone who wants to master the craft. But if you're doing it as a living, you have to balance the outcome with that quality and that value, right? And so there's nuances to it. You're never going to be able to swing too far one direction or the other.
Mm-hmm. So if we could get more like tangible, what do you think some examples are of BS content, especially you mentioned specifically in the B2B content space? You don't have to call out specific people or brands, obviously, but
I think the worst offenders are the hustle bros, as I like to call them. I know they go by a variety of nicknames. These are the guys who are pushing you to spend a few $100s, just buy their online course because you too can make $1 million in 6 months by following their 5 easy steps. And also they woke up at 4 a.m. and drank a green smoothie and did a cold plunge, right? And so if you're not buying their course, starting your business, starting your own hustle, and you're still employed, then you should be ashamed of yourself. We see this everywhere. And that's a perfect example of the crappy content too, right? Like this is, they're just cranking out as much as they can and fear-mongering and playing on people's insecurities so that they can sell as much as they can as quickly as they can without really giving any thought to the outcome or the value that they're putting out there. These are guys too, where I wish there was a Carfax for people, because there are people online selling this stuff saying they're making all this money. And I don't think they are. I think a lot of them have the rented Lambo and they're in their mom's basement. There's someone I used to work with years ago who is online selling leadership courses. And in the almost a decade that I've known this person, as far as I know, he's never been in a leadership role.
Yeah.
So yes, you can be a leader without the title. And again, there's nuance to everything, but it feels misleading because most people are probably buying this course assuming that he has a wealth of leadership experience.
All right. We were talking before, and that was like before we started rolling about like sometimes there's hot takes and I really care about them. And sometimes I'm like, whatever. You stumbled on one that I really care about and know a lot about, which is really grifters. Did you know, by the way, so this is like not a new problem. It's just very visible now because there's like the Twitter to course or Twitter to like webinar to course pipeline. And like we see all the people very visibly now. Did you know that that book by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich? Do you know this book?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know like the backstory on this?
No.
It was a total fraud. Like he wrote it as if he had known and was like mentored by Andrew Carnegie, and like this guy researched it, and there's like this whole article breaking it down. He didn't know Andrew Carnegie. It was all bullshit. And he just wrote this book and like did courses and seminars and all that stuff back in the day to sell on the backs of that reputation. And I think you see the same pattern play out in different formats. You know, like I guess I'll mention names now, but like Ty Lopez with the YouTube stuff, and now I see a lot now who are doing little Instagram clips and TikTok clips and little interviews. They're kind of using like the podcast, their authority building platform, and they ostensibly got wealthy doing sort of private equity stuff or real estate stuff, but now they're selling courses and teaching you how to do that. And my first thought is always like, you're in this industry that has historically made many people wealthy, but you're spending your time doing podcasts and selling courses. Like there's something missing here. Like you're spending a lot of time doing this for somebody who's like ostensibly very successful in the space that would probably require a lot of time and investment. It's very strange.
Or it's because you also can get really rich selling courses.
I think that's what they figured out.
But again, there's an ethical way to do it, or a way where you're probably just going to bed proud of yourself at night, right? And then there is sort of the hustler, swindler way to do it.
Yeah, 100%. But it's like nobody fact checks like the money they say they've made or the success they proclaim to have had. It's like there's a lot of ways to fake that. And there's a lot of ways to fake that. And it ruins the conversation for the people that do have impressive metrics, because so many people come in like a skeptic. I would love to be on LinkedIn right now saying, I built a 6-figure business in 6 months and here's how I did it, which is factual. And I can show you the Carfax, but I would never dare, because it looks like hustle bro language, right? I refuse to talk to people that way. We were terrified to put out a course because we didn't want to be lumped in with the course creator crowd, the info product crowd. And what we did was we built the course for our own internal training, because it was when we just started to hire employees, and we're like, we need a way to like outsource our brains and like the way we've done content through our various like our careers and all of that stuff. Like we might as well put this external facing and sell it as well. But it took such a psychological leap of faith because all of us had that cringe factor, because we didn't want to be lumped in with those people.
Yeah. I wrote a course during the pandemic and it's still sitting there the entire course because I hit the cringe factor point and I couldn't turn it off. I think Substack is going to have a moment, or something like Substack, if it's not Substack. And I think that maybe hopefully a newer, better version of the digital course. Like the digital course seems like it's a bit played out at this point. And a lot of the people who are interested in quality are looking for alternatives. And I like that platforms like Substack are trying to offer an alternative. And it's very grounded in the idea that you're subscribing to quality, and people are writing for quality. They're writing to get you specifically to follow them and subscribe to them, which means reach doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So those fortune cookie tweets aren't going to get you anywhere on Substack, right? So you're going to see better results if you come in with quality. I like the idea that someone built a platform that is just playing into how do we create a place and a circumstance where we are encouraging people to then create the outcome that we want to see.
Mm-hmm. How do you think that brands should be doing things differently to avoid doing BS content? As an industry, how should we be transforming the way we work?
Well, I specialize in B2B, and I think one of the classic complaints about B2B is still true, and very few brands manage to break out of it, which is we all sound the same. Everyone is using the same buzzwords, the same jargon. They're looking around, and you've got a CEO saying, well, our competitors are doing XYZ, so why aren't we doing that too? Right? And so everyone starts sounding like each other. They're all innovating with their synergy, right? There's nothing distinguishing about that. So just finding a way that you can differentiate the brand and stand out is going to get you much farther than your competitors in the first place. People are going to stand up and take notice, and maybe they're going to remember your name in a sea of people that sound the same. I think risky, that is, it is. And the other thing is, again, we already talked about this, you still have that level of accountability. So you have to have more of a reason to tell your CEO, here's why we're not doing XYZ, than, well, we're just not doing it because our competitors are doing it, right? How do you tie that to a data point? How do you quantify that decision? And that's when it gets really tough, because we're working in a space where not everything can be tied to data and analytics, because there's so much of it that is tied to creativity and emotion and psychology, right? And so some of that is just intuition or a level of craftsmanship. I've been doing this for 15 years. I need you to trust me, right? How do you have those conversations? And I think we need to create a business world where we remember that, especially when we're working with creatives, there is this concept of craftsmanship and not everything can be tied to a number.
Do you think in the past couple of years we've over-relied on data and left brain thinking with regards to content and marketing?
Yes. And that's the worst part of ChatGPT. People are very excited to hand over the complete thinking process to a robot. They're desperately trying to outsource their thought process.
What do you think is going to happen with ChatGPT? What are your thoughts on AI?
I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. The oversaturation is going to be mind-numbing in the next 6 to 12 months. Anyone who thinks ChatGPT is that sort of get-rich-quick, easy solution to spinning out a bunch of content, doing a lot of cold DMs. I've seen a lot of people using it for cold DMs. They're going to heavily invest in that, fire whatever few marketing people they were working with, and spin out a bunch of stuff that is probably generic, not thought out, doesn't contain a lot of nuance, may sound just like the prompts your competitors were feeding into it if you're just copying and pasting it, and then not get results, right? And then it will start swinging the other way because they won't get the results. The other thing I really have a problem with from a content standpoint, if we're talking about value, is just this concept of misinformation. There's no fact checking, there's no source citing, there's nothing of the sort. For some things, maybe it doesn't matter. If you look up a recipe and it just spits out a recipe, great, that's all I needed. It doesn't really matter where it came from. If you are looking up information that is about health or finance or best practices for something, if you're Googling that, part of the clout that comes with a high domain site or a brand name that we're really familiar with is that they're trustworthy and they're credible, right? So it's maybe vetted information. If you see a peer-reviewed website and you're looking at medical information, you're much more likely to click that, read that, and trust that. Whereas if you're using a tool like ChatGPT, where is that information coming from? And how accurate is it? You have no idea if you're not doing that next step of doing a double check, right? I also think that it's not going to bring the same value for very niche products or segments of the industry, because someone who's been in it is able to connect the dots. They can give you historical context. They can look at trends. They can cross over and pull ideas or mental models from other roles, other industries or products that are doing something similar, right? ChatGPT can't connect any of those dots yet. And maybe it will in the future, but I think we're a very long way off before it's really going to spin out anything incredible. If you want to use it for ideation and sparking different types of ideas and things that you maybe hadn't thought of, or rounding out a content brief, something like that, I absolutely think it has its place. I also think it would be silly to ignore it, but I don't think it's this magical solution to everyone's content problems that people seem to think it is.
Yeah, I ironically think that the worst use case for it right now is the writing. I think everything, it's actually really good at it's good at if you have a bunch of qualitative data, or I was talking to somebody earlier about if you want to fulfill some product copy, you can go to, say, G2 and feed it a bunch of reviews from customers and see what they're talking about, and it'll synthesize that information very well, which is something that takes a human a long time to do.
Yes.
So there's all of these interesting automation things that it can do, but the writing itself I've actually found to be the weakest point, and that's the thing that people seem to talk about the most.
I agree. But we as a society have never really valued writing, have we? There's a lot of people still hiring bloggers on Fiverr for pennies on the dollar, and they're not willing to invest anymore. So I think part of that is tied to the perception that comes with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's writing and there's insight or experience or knowledge. There's some word that I'm looking for. Substance, I guess, would just be the catch-all. But I think what impresses people is that the writing is fine. Like with ChatGPT, it's not great. It's passable, but there's nothing kind of behind it. And what I've always valued is the substance behind it. So personally speaking, I value editing. I value good quality content and written well, but I would definitely read a very shoddily written piece if it was backed by something that was something I couldn't get anywhere else. If it was written by somebody who has 20 years experience doing the thing that they've done and no one else has that experience, even if they can't string together a sentence, I think that's still cool It's like that the AI can't do that.
Yes. Because
I
they're
don't know if
still
it will
giving
be
you
able
value,
to.
right? Like
Yeah.
someone can have a lot of value and insight and knowledge to share with you, and it can be phenomenal. It just means they're not a good writer if they're sharing it in the written form, right? So those things aren't mutually exclusive necessarily.
Yeah. And that's where I wonder, and I don't know if this is a counterpoint to your first point around the kind of bullshit that's going to be flooding the internet. But I think what a lot of writers were doing pre-AI was essentially a manual process of what AI does, which is, you would take like a list of keywords, you would pop into the SERPs and see what other people had written about, basically rehash it. So it's not plagiarism technically, but it's kind of plagiarism. And then you would add 200 words to the piece and like a little spin on the story up front in the introduction to make it yours. And I feel like ChatGPT makes it's faster to do that. It doesn't take as much effort. So there's probably going to be more of that. But I think it's not that much different from what a lot of writers were doing before. And the ones who would stand out were the ones who truly had the insights anyway. So I think those people are probably still going to win in this era.
Yes. I think ChatGPT will replace that bottom tier of quality. And I'm okay with that because those people are either going to be, this sounds harsh, but forced out of the field into something where they're hopefully more successful, or they're going to be forced to level up their skills so that they're bringing something to the table that is above and beyond what ChatGPT or some other AI tool can provide, right? If I am absolutely getting a box checked from a free tool on the internet versus a freelancer that I hired, I'm using the free tool as well, right? So what that really speaks to is the quality and the caliber that those people are working at. And that shouldn't be okay anyway. Again, if we're going back to integrity, like where is the integrity? And I also want to make space. Some people are just very junior or they don't know better, right? Again, like I mentioned this before, but the barrier to entry is so low. And I'm one of those people who spent years saying that too. I came from a very poor background, didn't go to a good college, didn't have a network, and just worked my way up because you can really master digital marketing on the internet. You don't need any specific credential as long as you're putting in the work, right? And eventually you have the experience and the results to back that up. That's one of the wonderful things about it. But there are people that just hit that low barrier and then never really evolve past that. They're not trying to improve. They're not mastering the craft. And so you really do have to have that commitment to quality and learning more if you do want to advance. So another J.A. Kunzo thing, this is the third time I've said his name, so we can't say it again for the rest of the episode. But he talks about in the beginning, you have a momentum problem, not a brilliance problem, right? So work on momentum. Ship, because if you're shipping, you're practicing. So you're naturally going to get better over time, right? And then you work on brilliance. Once you've got the routine down, you've got the mechanics, then you say, how can I make this the best possible thing that someone wants to read or listen to? A lot of people get stuck in the momentum these days and never actually move on to the brilliance portion of content creation.
Yeah. Yeah, that resonates with one of my contrarian opinions, actually. But I just read before that, I just read an old Ryan Holiday article today about why he chooses quantity over quality and why his productivity tip was basically choose quantity over quality and commitment. And he would commit to deadlines that he thought were insane just because it forced him to basically ship by that time. And he made the point that I think Jay was making, which is like through practice, you end up learning what quality even means. Like before, you don't even have this idea of what it means. And then through repeated exposure, it's like Picasso painted thousands of paintings, But that's my contrarian advice because I worked in experimentation and conversion optimization. Like everybody wants quality experiments, but I actually think you should start out. You should learn some basics of statistics and all of that stuff, but try to push the limits on how many experiments you can run with the traffic that you have, because that's going to show you like your capabilities, what other resources you need. It's going to basically test the limits of what you can do. And you're going to learn through the process. You're going to learn what works, what doesn't work, what doesn't matter. But instead of spending 2.5 months trying to ideate the perfect experiment, just run one. Just get out the door and actually run something. And a lot of people have the opposite take. And I think in content, the same thing is true. It's like people will tell you, to spend all of your time crafting one piece. But if you haven't written anything before, how do you even know what quality is for that first piece?
Yeah, you can't work in a vacuum.
Procrastination.
Yeah, you need the feedback, right? If you're working in a vacuum, you're not getting any feedback. And part of what helps us evolve and improve is that feedback. whether it's coming from your audience or the data points of a test or something else. So I agree with you there. I think like a lot of things in marketing, the gray area is probably your right answer. You can't swing one way or the other. What is important to me is the intent behind it. Is someone going in trying to create something really great and consistently trying to improve? Or are they someone who has found a way to get paid for low-level skills and sits back at the end of the day, checks the box and says, good enough, right? Those people are going to be the crappy content creators. There's also crap in every industry, right? We're going to run into that outside marketing. I know we're talking about marketing, but there's always going to be that person. And the people who are naturally driven to overachieve, who are passionate, who are curious, who are really interested in providing value or creating connections or good experiences for other people are the ones who are naturally going to excel.
Mm-hmm. Let's shift it up. Okay. Explain like I'm 5. What does a fractional content leader do?
So you've probably heard of fractional CMOs or COOs, which are a little more popular. So a fractional leader is someone who comes in and acts as that role for a fraction of the time and of the cost. So this is very popular in the B2B startup world because a lot of companies, as they're scaling, are not in a place where they can afford the full-time headcount. They maybe don't have the hours or maybe don't have the budget yet or both. So if you bring in a fractional leader, you are getting the benefits of all of that expertise and experience, but you're getting it for less time span. So maybe someone's coming in 5-10 hours a week and guiding your operations or your go-to-market or something like that. So I do fractional content marketing leadership, which means I work with a variety of companies acting as their content marketing leader. So they typically are startups that are very new to content marketing or trying to scale it with a very lean team. So I come in and act as that person who owns it, advocates for it, mentors the team, helps grow the program until they are in a position where they can bring someone in full time or bring in other team members.
What do you think makes a successful fractional marketing consultant or hire? What's the secret sauce to making that a valuable thing for the company that you work with?
I treat it just like I'm an in-house employee. So there are freelancers and consultants. I never use the term freelance because traditionally we have a lot of negative connotations that come with that word, right? Consultants typically come in, do exactly what you've hired them to do, check the box and leave. They are providing a service or oftentimes a deliverable. There's a very marked outcome. With fractional content leadership, especially for a company that's trying to build and scale a content program, there are oftentimes unforeseen events. There's not just marketing itself, but needing to align with stakeholders in other departments, get buy-in from other teams, work in alignment with other teams. There's all of this overlap with product and dev and UX and design. So I am the person who has those conversations. So it's not about just coming in and saying, great, here's some keyword research, here's a content strategy, here's what we're going to publish, and there's a roadmap. It's much more about the organizational nuances of making sure that you really have the buy-in, the strong relationships and alignment across teams, across departments, so that you can build and scale the program. I'm trying to build something sustainable. And so in that way, I really am, when I say I own and advocate for it, I am acting just the way a full-time content marketing leader would. I'm sitting in those meetings, I'm having those conversations. I'm oftentimes the person that is training and developing or even helping them bring in new hires the same way a full-time hire would. I'm just doing it for a fraction of the time.
Yeah, I'm really glad you touched on that point because I've been thinking about what really makes a successful agency on the higher end of services, like, you know, when it's a lot more like white glove premium, what makes them successful. And you touched on one point that I think a lot of them miss, which is, I call it executive presence. It's that it's hard to define. It's basically what you just said, you know, like being able to like roll up your sleeves and talk to different departments and do the things that an in-house hire, especially like an executive level, would do. So a lot of people have the strategy. I think like a lot of people just have the strategy, frankly. Like there's a lot of advisors who, you know, just have the ideas and it's like, okay, you need to execute too, or at least like place people who can execute. But then a lot of agencies will have those two pieces, but won't have the ability to actually make change, make shit happen in the organization. So I feel like that is, I'm really glad you touched on that because I do think that is an underrated component when an external person works within, in-house team.
Well, especially with a lean team, right? You have the strategy, but you don't have the bodies to execute, or vice versa. You have a few junior people in there, or maybe some contractors or part-time freelancers, but you don't have a strategy in place because you don't have that leadership expert in that department or in that role yet. So you really need both pieces. And that's where I come in, because I can put together the strategy, I can guide the team, I can build the relationships, but I also can absolutely roll up my sleeves and help with the production if need be, and get the machine moving, right? So I started my career as a blogger. I have sat in every possible role on a content marketing team. My trajectory was very linear. And I think that's one of the things that helps me, because I do have the perspective of working in those roles and then now leading those roles as well.
Gotcha. And do you think that there are lessons that you've picked up doing fractional content leadership? Do you think there's things that you've learned that could apply to in-house marketing leaders as well?
I think I touched on it a moment ago, but you really need both pieces. A lot of people say, great, let's just start putting out content and see if it sticks. I'm going to give you a little bit of a budget. I'm kind of skeptical. What happens if you're not working on a strategy? You're not getting the results. So all you're doing is really proving the point for that skeptic, right? On the other hand, you have a strategy, but no one's executing. So then you have someone saying, we paid an agency, especially if it's a boutique agency, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for the strategy and this roadmap and all of these recommendations, and you physically don't have the people that can execute on that, or they're just executing on components of that. And because they're not doing the entire package, you are not going to see the same results and the same outcomes. We've seen that over and over again. I've been in-house at agencies, and that's one of the number one complaints from clients, right? They come back a few months later, they're complaining they didn't see results, and you're asking them why, and you're walking through the conversation, and they're like, oh, well, we did this, but we didn't do that, or we're doing this part of the time. Well, then of course you're not getting the results, right? Because you're not following the strategy. So I think it's really important for people to realize that if they're going to invest in content, there is a sweet spot to start out in. And even if it's a modest strategy, even if it's a single channel, a single set of deliverables, have that in place as a jumping off point and do the production there. And then you can double down if that's working. It's easier to pivot if it's not. And you can invest in other areas and scale the program as you see the results. A lot of people also think they have to do everything. They're going to start a podcast, a blog, and be on 4 social media platforms. That's insane. That's an entire department's worth of work, right? And if you're spreading yourself that thin and sort of diluting your efforts, you're not going to see traction as quickly as you would if you just heavily invested in one channel. How can we become the hot new podcast in our specific niche? And let's put everything we have behind that in content for 6 months and see what happens, right? You're going to see much more powerful results that way. If you think about, have you read the book Essentialism?
I still haven't, no.
Oh, okay. He has this graphic that everyone shares from Essentialism where there's essentially a hub and there's a bunch of projects. So there's all of this energy coming off of this hub, right? And it's going to 20, 30 different places. So you don't see the energy moving that far. And then he has a graphic next to it where there's the same hub and there's investment in all of this energy in one single source. So what happens? All of the energy is going farther. Yeah. And it's a really nice visual for that idea. It relates really well to content marketing.
I got to read that book. I'm a big fan of that idea. Robert Greene talks about that as like concentrating your forces, but even just like mentally and personally, like I can only do like one thing at a time. I just don't have the wherewithal. It's
great
to, like,
if you have shiny object syndrome. Like it's really great. Yeah, you should read it then. 100%. Yeah.
That's a great answer. I love the focus is so important, especially in these times. Like I feel like everybody's like do more with less or something like that. It's like, I don't know, maybe just focus, do less with less. Just like aim your laser a little bit more like presciently in one direction as opposed to diluting it everywhere. Couple like kind of contrarian questions, if you will. I know we've talked already about contrarian beliefs, but what is something that you believe about content marketing that you believe to be true that most people would disagree with you on?
Oh, this is a good one. I don't know. I'm trying to get outside of my echo chamber because you tend to talk to a lot of people that agree with you, right? So like, I want to say there's more crap than good in the industry, but a lot of people I know would agree with me on that. I don't know if that's a contrarian take at all. I think I'm maybe just more vocal about it, and a lot of people believe it, but they're not saying it.
Yeah. I think, not a lot of people say it.
Yeah. One of the old school business takes is still that you can't build and scale a successful business on content, which is why so many startups start with a paid program. We're all familiar with that. That is patently untrue from what I've seen. You have to do it correctly and from a strategy, the same way that you would have to do with paid. But there are startups out there that are reeling in millions of dollars off organic content marketing. So there is a place for that in the startup world. And the trend that I see is most companies bring me in when at a very specific point. They've started with a paid program, it's plateauing, it's getting too expensive, and they suddenly need to offset their paid spend and diversify their lead gen sources. And that's when suddenly content seems like a good idea. Mm-hmm. And that threshold is absolutely when almost everyone brings me into the organization. So there's a pervading belief there that some people think is still true in the startup world. And I would love to squash that one if I can squash something right now. You can start with content, and typically you get better results if you start with it early on, because a lot of people will build a site thinking that it is just a paid resource. They treat it more like a landing page. And then when you go back later on and try to implement UX and SEO and really build out the infrastructure for a more full-scale omnichannel marketing program, you tend to run into a lot of problems.
Yeah, I agree. I do enjoy it though when people have figured out their paid funnel and then bring us in, because then it's like you just have to, I mean, obviously there's startup costs to SEO especially, but if they've got their conversion funnels and they've tested it with paid ads, I'm like, all right, we can bring the traffic and convert it. Like you've figured out your messaging, you've figured out your funnel. This is awesome. So I do like that.
True. It's true. And I still oftentimes pair with paid for testing. That's something people overlook too. The feedback cycle for organic can be so slow, right? So if you have narrowed it down to a couple different messaging ideas or value props, walk over to paid, see if somebody can run a test and put it in an ad for a couple hours, and you're going to know immediately whether it's sticking or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you cross collaborate. I think some people get too ideological and they're like, "No, content is my thing." And it's like,
no, I spend a lot of I spend a lot of time with the other marketing channels, a lot of time with product and with dev. Right, sites are often my bread and butter for organic content marketing, so I need to make very good friends with the dev team.
Yeah, love that. All right, what's something you've changed your mind about recently?
I think this is contrarian to everything we probably said today, but I think the future of content marketing. I spent the past few years wondering if we were going to hit this rock bottom of oversaturation and needing to constantly feed the machine. And it was going to start feeling like Groundhog Day. Where do we go from here? It's just the same thing over and over and over again. We're not really evolving. And I think especially in the past year, we're seeing platforms and creators being really vocal about changing the conversation, returning to sort of the craft and to this idea of quality. And I can see a glimmer of hope. Everyone has an existential crisis during a pandemic, but I spent the early days of the pandemic really wondering at certain points if I should keep building my career in content marketing, because it was just constantly more of the same, right? And now there are these people out here with really cool messaging, doing really cool stuff to encourage the kind of content we all want to see and interact with. And not just as marketers and creators, but the stuff that we want to be consuming, right? How we want to spend our time. So that's really exciting. Brands like Substack have me legitimately excited for what the future of content marketing is going to look like, aside from ChatGPT, in the next year or two.
That's awesome that you have the optimistic take too. I do think that, I don't know, we've been shaken up the last year or two. I have seen a lot more interesting voices and interesting ideas come out of what was pretty stagnant before. And I'm pretty optimistic about generative AI and ChatGPT as well. I think I agree with you on the short term being flooded with a bunch of bullshit. But my hope is that it does that flooding with bullshit is going to cause people to tune out on that. And hopefully the voices who matter, the ones who care, the ones who are producing good stuff will stand out. And hopefully generative AI can actually help unleash people who wouldn't have otherwise been writers. If we can figure out how to unleash subject matter expertise and help them get up to the point where they can produce a draft or produce a tweet or something like that, and lower the barrier to entry to people who have all this dormant knowledge, I actually think that might be really good for the world.
I think it would be great for the world. There are a lot of people out there with incredible insights and expertise, and we just aren't hearing from them because no one's handed them a microphone. The best marketers that I know are still not some of the big names in the industry that we're familiar with. They're people that are so busy behind the scenes and have such long wait lists that they don't have the time or inclination to put out any of their own content or even share that, right? You just meet them by happenstance. So I think the same is true for anyone outside marketing. How many people haven't shared their ideas because they think they're a bad writer? You know, we got podcasts, we got videos. If we can keep evolving that way so that there's constantly a new medium for sharing ideas and connecting, that's something that is really cool and inspiring.
Yeah. Do you want to do a couple of rapid fire questions?
Sure. Let's hope I have answers.
Who do you admire professionally and why?
Well, I can't say Jay's name again. Does it have to be a marketer? Can it just be anyone?
It could be anyone. Yeah. Okay.
I hope she hears this. I am obsessed with the founder of Spanx. Are you familiar with her?
I think so. Yeah, for sure. I feel like I've listened to her on a podcast before. She
is a phenomenal success story. We all love this sort of rags to riches success story, but she built a $1 billion empire and never gave away any equity until the very end, until she sold it. She started out selling fax machines, got the idea for Spanx, couldn't get anyone to do a prototype, couldn't get factories to create it. When she talked her way into getting a couple deals with the first few department stores, it's typically based on a small run, right? So they buy X amount of the product, and if it sells really well, it sells quickly, then they may refill the order. She knew this going in, and so she went into Bloomingdale's or something and was just going around the store like a crazy person talking to people. Oh, hey, I saw that you're looking at this stuff. Have you considered Spanx? Let me tell you about this product. Hit the ground running. I mean, the most hands-on effort that you've ever seen for a startup. Like nowadays, we're all working hard in the business, but we're at home in sweatpants at a keyboard, right? She literally rolled up her sleeves and was out in the field and scaled the business that way. And so I listened to every interview she's ever done. She has some phenomenal stuff about just resilience and grit and believing in an idea and going. She said she would convince the world if she just had to have a personal conversation with every single person. And the first several years, that's what she did. It was literally person by person by person. And that's how she got people to believe in her brand. And it's incredible. Like one of the best stories of resilience I've ever heard of.
I love that. That's a great answer. If you could create your own category in Jeopardy, what would that be? And would you get every question right?
Nerdy pop songs that get girls dancing. I grew up in a dance studio. This has nothing to do with marketing, but I grew up in a dance studio and I did classical ballet actually for 28 years. So a lot of my close friends are people that also grew up in the arts or dance or musical theater of some sort. And we are those people that are the first people on a dance floor at a wedding, or we can hear 3 notes of a song and tell you what song it is. I would say that's probably my nerdiest area of expertise.
I forgot to tell you too, your answers to anything don't have to do, they don't have to be about marketing at all.
Okay, good.
Talk about whatever we want. Give me some example songs. What gets people dancing?
Oh, this is going to haunt me. People are going to make fun of me forever. Which songs are less embarrassing? No, I can't do it. Call Me Maybe. Doesn't matter where I am. I could be in a courtroom on trial and I would probably start chair dancing. Great jam. A lot of those 90s, early 2000s R&B songs, Rump Shaker, Baby Got Back. That was, the college days. Anything that was popular during the Britney Spears midriff era. I really shined during that era, I'm sad to say. Also, saving grace that social media was not a big thing then because there is not a lot of photographic evidence of my midriff. Yes.
I'm also glad social media wasn't a thing back then. It would have been so cringy. I can't imagine growing up and like just having everything recorded, like especially like your awkward middle school stage. I'm really glad that wasn't recorded.
Or just poor college decisions. I'm thrilled that stuff was not recorded on the internet somewhere.
Yeah. Which talent would you most like to have?
Stock market predictions.
It's a good one. It's a good one. um, I used to ask this question, do you consider yourself more scientific or artistic? But I actually think scientific is artistic in a way. So I'm actually going to ask it differently. Do you consider yourself more scientific or more of a scientist or more of an engineer?
I would say more of an engineer. Even though I spent years in a dance studio and started my career as a writer and a creative, the parts of my job I get the most satisfaction out of are bringing something to life, figuring out how to put an idea in motion or create something from nothing. How do you put it out into the world? How do you accelerate that process? How do you share it with someone, connect with someone? So I think if we are looking at engineering in terms of creating that tangible moment, that is really where I feel that I shine, and it's what brings me the most joy.
Nice. What's a career choice that you considered but did not pursue?
Oh, there were so many. I could not pick a major in college. I was that person. So ballerina, obviously, since I spent 28 years doing classical ballet. I started as a psych major and then quickly discovered I didn't want to hear people complain all day, which is why I didn't major in psych. That was a big joke by the universe because now that I work in leadership, most of my job is fielding complaints all day or mediating conversations. What else? Philosophy professor. I also majored in philosophy for a short time and thought about becoming a philosophy professor. I ultimately majored in social science, not because I necessarily knew what I wanted to do, but because I was really interested in demographic research and thought that I would end up working somehow in that end of marketing. So it did serve its purpose, especially because it's a lot of research and a lot of writing, which is ultimately what built my career. But I had so many. That's an important point too. I don't understand why we're asking 18-year-olds to plan the next 50, 60 years of their lives. That's a lot to ask. I couldn't find my car keys when I was 18. How was I supposed to make a decision like that? And I wish someone had sat me down at the age of 18 and said, you're really just committing to the next couple of years of your life. You can pivot, you can make different choices, you can follow things that interest you and let go of things that don't. And you don't have to have all the answers right now. And I think the farther we get into our lives, the more comfortable we are with doing that. But even now, that's something that still applies, right? If you're starting a project or moving to a new city or taking a new job, you're really not committing for the rest of your life, even though it feels that way. You're committing to the next year or two.
Yeah. Yeah, that resonates. I'm moving to New York, I think I told you, and it's like one of those things where I'm like, if I don't like it, I can come back. I don't have to be there forever. And I think about that with a lot of decisions. I'm like, a lot of them are way more reversible than we think they are.
Yes. We tend to build it up in our heads, especially when we're younger.
Mm-hmm. I wish I would have done a philosophy minor, at least. I think that's one of my regrets.
I
like,
thought
when do you have time? Like, I feel like college, it's such a good time to like dive into that. Like, I feel like I want to read about philosophy all the time now, and I do from time to time, but I don't know. It would have been fun to just read. I don't know. What did you even read? Like Camus? Existentialism?
Essentialism would be a good start for applying it. There's Plato, there's Buddha, there's Confucianism. The great thing about reading philosophy in college is you're still trying to figure it all out. And philosophy is largely based in helping you figure it all out.
Yeah.
What's important? What are the answers? What am I thinking about? Why am I thinking about that? So there's no one right answer, right? It's all up for debate. And so I think what it really does is it teaches you how to think. And I think that's something that we all really should be forced to learn in school. It's really setting a framework for a lot of critical thinking and self-assessment.
Yeah. It gives you cool lenses with which to view the world too. Did you watch the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once?
I haven't seen it yet. I'm the only person who hasn't seen it.
Okay, you should definitely watch it because I feel like it goes through multiple different lenses, through like philosophical lenses by which people can view the world. And it's psychedelic in a sense because it's about like multiverse kind of thing. But Yeah, to like flip through like nihilism to like absurdism to existentialism to all these different, there's different characters that represent different kind of angles, but it's like the same base reality that they're all in, but they just view it differently.
I will add it to my queue.
Hell yeah. I think that's all I got. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about or we didn't talk about that you'd want to mention?
No, I think I mentioned Jaya Kunzer too many times. I got to get my own ideas, man. I think I made it all the way through without saying a curse word, which is huge for me. Huge.
Are you working on that? You can curse if you want.
I know, but I am definitely the person in any meeting that's most likely to say shit. I really am. And so I am working on that to some extent because in some environments it's not as welcome. So yeah. That's
funny. Yeah.
I'm much more articulate with a keyboard than I am with my mouth. So there's definitely moments where, it's that imposter syndrome that we all do. But, I now work in this field with all of these really remarkable people who did go to impressive schools and do have these impressive backgrounds. And I still have that moment of poor kid syndrome every time I bust out with dude or stoked or shit. I
actually think it's actually a symbol of confidence. I think Nassim Taleb might make this point. It used to be a thing with tattoos. Like if you were like in a white collar job and you had tattoos, that was a symbol that you didn't give a fuck. And therefore you were confident and probably successful. And he talked about that with swearing too, at least in strategic contexts. So I feel the same way. Like I'm very informal. But it might also show people that you're like, your shit,
Hopefully there's always that fear that, someone is just looking at me going, why is she here again? Like I've just been found out. But I don't know if that ever goes away because the farther I get into my career, the more impressive people I meet. So it just compounds it.
Yeah. Yeah. The old imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
We did a whole episode on that. It doesn't go away. So
it really doesn't. It really does not. I don't have an answer for that one.
Well, this has been awesome. Where can people find you online? Any links, any content that you want to point to right now?
I am very active on LinkedIn. I post every day, so definitely give me a follow on LinkedIn. My website is thecontent.market, although there is minimal content there right now. I just got the site up and running. I also will be launching a Substack soon, so stay tuned for that.
Hell yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.